going, and we're now officially live. So this is Chad McDaniel with Execs in the Know. I, first of all, thank you again, everyone. Very important topic today, building really the foundation of transformative self-service. I know we hear a lot about self-service and the things that are out there, but this is about the foundation component, and I'll explain what I mean as we get in through this today. David James, I'll be introducing you here in a second, but thank you again for your time and participating with today's webinar. If we could go to the next slide, David, if you could help me out on that. For those that are not familiar with about us, Execs in the Know is really, we are a customer advocacy group, a community answers group, a peer-to-peer networking group, best practices for the customer executive, the customer leader. For all our listeners today, I would strongly encourage you, if you've not been to execsintheknow.com, you can go to the resources tab. There's some tremendous opportunity for reports, benchmarking reports, other data sets, and a variety of content stuff that really is designed to try to help the success of today's customer leaders. So Execs in the Know is a very large group of brands that want to have unfiltered access to each other, sharing best practices in kind of an internal mentorship group. And there's a number of ways for our listeners to get involved in the community. If you have any questions about anything that's referenced today's webinar or us in general, you can always reach me, Chad, at execsintheknow.com. But there's a large group of people out there that are looking to connect, looking to share insights and best practices. David, if we could go on to the next slide, please. The presentation, just a little bit of housekeeping here. So at the end of the webinar, there is going to be the platform, I think, will send you a link or send you a note to complete a survey. You are my guest. I would ask you to please take a minute, complete the survey. Let me know what you thought of today's session, the value of content and quality of conversation that we had. I would love to hear from you. And tomorrow, you will get a link. The presentation will be made available after the webinar. Everything you're going to see today, the slides, the recording, it'll all be presented to you, so we have a digital copy of that. So stay tuned. And also throughout the conversation, I'm going to try to make this as very interactive as possible. Get your thoughts, your opinions, your comments. You should, in the platform, have a chat box function or a Q&A function, and you can send me direct comments, questions privately, or you can send it to the entire group. But please, I'd love to hear from you throughout the conversation and get your expertise. If we could go to the next slide. So, David, people that know me well, I am not a fan of reading bios. However, I absolutely appreciate the insight, the expertise, and the knowledge and the willingness that Coveo continues to display within our community of helping share best practices and insights and kind of just overall thought leadership and guidance. David, if you could, just to help set the stage with our audience, maybe just briefly introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what your role is, and what we hope to gain today for the purpose of the call.
Great, thanks, Chad, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm David James. I'm Director of Product Marketing at Coveo, specifically for our Coveo for Salesforce line of business. We have several lines of business at Coveo. We integrate with Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics, Sitecore, your normal platform. So I head up that product marketing role. I've been with the company for about 2 years. Before that, I was at Lithium Technologies and also served some time with Salesforce in the Service Cloud role. So looking forward to walking through some self-service strategies and taking some questions, hopefully not too hard, from Chad along the way.
Well, thank you, David, and let's get started. So let's go to the next slide, I think, before we get into some of the setting up to the background that you're going to take us through. Really what I'm hopeful for today is giving the audience some what we consider vital steps that they can undertake to transform their self-service strategy, and not just transforming it, but really looking at it holistically and understanding the power of that adoption and some other best practices and maybe even some failures that we can best guide. And again, we'll pull the audience into some of that conversation. So, David, I'm going to go on mute for a little bit and let you kind of start sharing the story, and let's get to it.
Great, thanks, Chad. And yes, please, Chad, ask away questions, interrupt me, and everyone who's on the line, please ask away your questions because we love getting some interaction. So, funny thing, I just noticed that the picture shown on this screen is different from the one that was on my bio, and I think I can attribute the loss of hair to my 2-year-old toddler. So that's where all the hair went. So, again, thanks for having us. Some of you may not be familiar with Coveo, so just a quick introduction about Coveo. We help customers improve their self-service capabilities, and you'll see kind of how we do that in some different ways, and help them find the most relevant content, whether that's in the customer self-service context, the agent context, or even employee or partner context. And it'll make more sense as we go along. I wanted to start out by sharing some metrics from an industry organization you may be familiar with, TSIA, Technology Services Industry Association. Just a few months ago, they published some new research, some benchmarking research about preferred channel choice for support. And I think this sets up kind of our discussion today. And the first thing that jumps out, you can see Google and self-service from a year-over-year standpoint. You can see the growth, especially self-service. People, it's no surprise you're on a self-service webinar. People are gravitating more towards self-service. They want to do it on their own terms. If you look down at the very bottom, you can see, well, where is that growth? What expense is that coming at? And you can see email, not phone, but email, probably suffered one of the biggest losses, and then phone up there, just a few more sandwiched in between Instagram and Facebook. So, probably not a huge surprise. I think the one big takeaway is, if you group Google and self-service together, I mean, people are going and searching, and that's where they want to find answers. So, what does that mean? So, TSIA did some correlations, and they looked at how much does it cost to self-serve. And these are for technology clients. So, the cost per incident is obviously going to vary based on what industry you're in. But they looked and they found that if you had a strong self-service strategy, that actually reduces your cost per incident quite significantly. So you can see weak self-service, $232 per case versus someone who has a strong self-service at $189. And part of that reason is, obviously, if someone goes to your website, tries to self-serve, can't find the answer, there's no knowledge available, they're going to pick up the phone, they're going to email, they're going to chat, they're going to do a blended variety of things to get in contact and serve and get that answer. So it's going to drive up cost to serve. So point one is strong self-service strategy is cheaper. I thought this was really interesting. They've also correlated strong self-service strategy to employee retention. So in this economy that we're in right now, finding good talent is probably one of the things that keeps a lot of hiring managers up at night, because it's just a tough job market to find really good talent. So if you have a strong self-service strategy, your employees have been found to be more satisfied. And that part of that goes to they're able to work on more challenging content. If you're calling in and asking the same thing over and over and over, that really doesn't drive a lot of employee satisfaction. Employees want to work on challenging content. They want stuff that's going to progress their career. And employee satisfaction directly transfers into employee attrition. So if you have a strong self-service strategy, you're going to hang on to those people because they're rewarded in their line of work. They feel like they're making a meaningful impact. So I thought this is interesting that strong self-service, not just a cost benefit, but it's also an employee retention benefit. And we all know, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we all know, when done right, a good self-service foundation drives higher CSAT. So we've established that it's cheaper, that employees are happier when you have a strong self-service strategy, and it drives higher customer satisfaction for your customers. So, what's not to love? It seems like everything's, why wouldn't you have a strong self-service strategy? And what we have found is there's some roadblocks that people encounter. Why isn't everyone doing this? One of the biggest roadblocks we've encountered is with the proliferation of apps and cloud applications and different channels. You've created, the silo mentality of every department is creating content and stored in its own repository. Service can't access documentation. Documentation can't access technical publications. No one can access YouTube for training. There's no LMS system that connects to support. So you get it. There's just a lot of pockets of good information, and there's no unified place to get this. And then maybe you've rolled it out, or you're starting to roll it out, but you have no baseline to track the progress. So you don't know what good looks like, or you have a sense of what good looks like, but you have no way of measuring that. And some of that happens with good analytics and reporting. So having metrics down to the click path of users to say, this is, and you're starting to build customer journeys to say, this is what good looks like. This is what I want my customers to be doing. So they can't do that. And then at the end of the day, there's just no high level unified view of the customer experience. You don't know, if, a customer profile A is doing this versus what customer profile B is doing. You don't know if their customer effort score is going up, is going down, what's happening. So there are a lot of kind of bigger macro issues at hand that that kind of makes relevant self-services experience so hard. And before were you going to say something, Chad?
I was, and I think this slide's going to answer it. Well, I'll just go to this slide, then I'm going to interrupt, and I want to ask the audience something, but please go through this.
Yeah, so we talk about self-service, and self-service can take a lot of different forms. I think the primary one we all think of is customer self-service. So I go to help.whatever.com and I type in my question and I get some answers back. But self-service can take the form of obviously public experiences, even on e-commerce, customer communities, but it can also be internally. So if you have a somewhat large employee base, maybe you need to self-serve for your HR function, or you need your contact center agents who are spread out all over. They need to be able to have tickets that they can self-serve on. And then for partners, partners need to self-serve as well, whether they need questions about support, whether a deal, content they're looking for. So when we're going through this, think broader than just a typical customer self-service strategy, because it can play in a lot of different ways.
I like that perspective. I mean, I've not really seen it presented that particular way, but I'm going to agree in a more broader way. And if you could quickly, Dave, just go back to the previous slide for the purpose of what I want to ask you in the audience. So I never like to assume anything, but for the purpose of today's call or listeners, when we think of channels, self-service channels, in your perspective, can you define what channels those are, what the self-service channels are, if that's the right way? And then I want to ask the audience a quick question just to make sure we're getting all the perspective of that.
Sure. So, I mean, the most common self-service strategy or channel would be going onto a website, maybe clicking on the support page and being presented with, ask your question. And then you're presented with, FAQs or knowledge articles. It can also take the form of if you have a customer community where, there's a lot of discussion back and forth. Maybe you have a community manager, you have moderators, People, you're not just trying to answer a one and done question, but you're trying to have a more deeper kind of back and forth, or maybe customer advocacy programs, things like that. So web self-service, community. I'll show you a little bit later. Customers are starting to look at in-product search and in-product help, so that you're not having to leave the experience of being inside your app to get the service that you need. So we'll look at some of those. And then another thing that's popping up a lot more are even chatbots, and the ability to, you see a little question mark on the screen, and you click on that and you ask a question, and it gives the simulation that you're talking to a live person. Sometimes they mask it, sometimes they don't. And you're chatting back and forth, but you're actually chatting back and forth with a bot, and that's just going back and querying all of your content sources and displaying that information. So it can take a lot of different channels.
Okay, so with that definition, thank you, and I'm going to ask the audience, and you can respond to me in the chat box function of the today's platform, and you can send it to me privately if you'd like. My question to you, and I need your help, audience, so please respond. Question is, if you as a brand have moved to, let's say, a self-service strategy, depending on the definition we just gave, how long ago did you do that? Have you ran into any gating issues, or what has been the experiences you're seeing, both positive or challenges? Kind of a broad question, but I'd like to get your just initial thoughts. If you have not implemented a self-service strategy, why is that? What's the thinking? What's the considering factors there? I'd love to get your thought too. And then what I'm hoping to do is, as I learn from your experiences, interweave that into some of today's discussion. But Dave, let's go ahead and continue forward. And again, audience, if you could help me out on what I'm asking, I'd love to hear your feedback.
Great, look forward to seeing that. Okay, so we'll go forward. Okay, so now we're going to get a little bit more practical and talk about what does transformative self-service look like. So Coveo obviously has a point of view about that, and we think to be able to drive a transformational self-service strategy for your organization, one of the key things is driving relevance. And we'll talk a little bit later about how relevance plays out. But that relevance requires building a solid foundation. And that starts with what we were just talking about, those channels, however you define a channel, whether that's through the websites, the communities, e-commerce, in-app support, mobile apps, contact centers. It can take any type of touch point. And you want to kind of standardize those touch points with a kind of a common interface. So we're seeing that in the center, so that people have a familiarity with the support experience that they're coming into. So if you look on the left-hand side, that interface needs to be fed with content, obviously. And one of our strongest points of view about this is that you need to connect with that content source and sources wherever it is within the enterprise. So a lot of people think I have to get all of my content out of all these different repositories and get it into one central, system, my Salesforce knowledge or my Inquira or whatever. That our point of view is that's likely never going to happen. So play the content where it lays, connect to it through connections, and then feed that into the interface. On the right side, you need to know how that information is being used to get signals and outcomes, and the more people are using it, the more you're learning, the more you're picking up trends about content usage and what's deflecting cases online, what's creating more self-service success. And those interactions, feed the machine learning. So machine learning thrives with data. So the more data, the more analytics, the more tracking that you're doing on this site, the better it's becoming. The more it's learning, the more it's able to serve up relevant content because it's learning what other people are finding useful. And when you're able to do that and kind of feed the beast, you're able to deliver a more relevant and personalized experience wherever that touch point occurs. So we're going to look at, get out of theory and actually look at a customer who's actually doing this. So Adobe, everyone's probably familiar with Adobe, has the Creative Cloud. So they moved to this cloud-based product. You no longer install, get a CD of Photoshop and install it. It's all done through the cloud now. So Adobe has built a solid knowledge foundation. So you see at the very bottom, they have a documentation system, they have a learning management system, they have Jira for product documentation and product technical documentation. They obviously have their own Adobe website system, they have Jive for internal communities, and then they have Salesforce. So that's kind of all the different pieces and all the different areas where the knowledge is captured. They have been able to index all of that content with Coveo, apply machine learning, and then push that out into various different touch points that we talked about using different interfaces. So if you look on the left-hand side of the website, people can go on to help, I think it's helpx.adobe.com and search for, how do I crop a photo? And we're going to come back and display community content, website content, FAQ content, wherever that content resides across the bottom. In the center, we talk about in-product help. So if you actually go, we'll look at this in more detail on the next screen. If you're actually using Photoshop and you're a Photoshop user, you click on the help button, they're actually displaying that machine learning content directly in the app. So you don't even have to leave Photoshop to get the best answer. And then from an agent side, let's say you have to call in, there's just no way to self-serve. You call in, the agents are actually querying content on that same knowledge foundation. So you get a very cohesive knowledge strategy because everyone's using the same knowledge platform at the core. So here's an example if you're using Creative Cloud, if you're using Photoshop, but on the Creative Cloud. And you want to know how to crop a picture, so you go up to this little magnifying glass up here at the top and you click on that. You're going to be presented with a search box, query box. And maybe you want to learn how to align objects. So if you see here, I don't know if it shows up here, this blue, but we're querying on the website. And we've actually found a how-to on the website. So clicking on that, you're able to solve the issue without ever leaving the app. So if you're creative, you're creating something, you're in the zone, you don't want to leave and go to a .com site, you want to stay in this app, you're able to do that with in-product search. And we talked about personalization. Well, what do we mean by personalization? So, being able to find the context of the user and being able to personalize the experience based on the context is even better when you're talking about self-service. So in this scenario, you're an anonymous user, you're just going on to Adobe's help site and you search for crop. So you're going to see a lot of cropping PDF pages. Some of it is for Photoshop, some of it's for Dreamweaver, some of it's for Illustrator. It's helping you, but it's not really personalized and tailored. Well, what if we started tracking your usage behavior and we knew that you came in through a Photoshop page and we start learning that, hey, I'm looking at a lot of Photoshop pages, I can infer that this person is a Photoshop user. So why don't I serve this person Photoshop related content first? So that's what we're doing with Adobe. And you can even do that if you're logged in. If you log in as a customer and you know that this person is entitled, has entitlements to Photoshop, you can also personalize the experience that way. And all of this, it's not just for, cosmetics. This actually does drive business results. So here are three high-level ones. Since rolling Coveo out on their website and communities, they've seen a 2x increase in the number of searches. So people are using it more because they're finding content better. Customer effort has gone down 3x. So we measure that by the decrease in no result queries. So that's when someone goes in, types something, and you can't find anything, which is horrible for a knowledge person. If your customer goes in and searches for an answer and there's a no result query. So we've been able to reduce that 3x. And then I think probably the most telling metric is conversion. So increased 41% click-through rates on results shown. So that means that we're showing content that's more relevant. We have a kind of a best-in-class measure where we track and we want content to be in the top 3 searches, or excuse me, the top 3 results. So, you know, over time with machine learning, it kicks in, it's learning more and more. The most relevant content is stuck right there in the top 3. That's the best in class. So let's shift and talk about, okay, you know, we know it's important. So what's a roadmap? What are some kind of practical ways to get started down that path? So we have 5.
David,
definitely.
I was going to jump in real quick again for our audience. Thank you for those that have added your comments in regards to my previous question. I love use cases, by the way, and thank you for sharing the client Adobe's use case. For our audience, as we continue there, if there are specific questions or clarifications you want to get from that use case we just showed, please, again, use the chat box. You can send me a quick note or comment, agree, disagree, have similar results, different results, any thoughts you have on that use case study that we just went through. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback to me privately. So if you could do that, I'd appreciate it. So we'll continue on. Thanks, David.
Sure. So here are 5, let me do a quick time check to make sure we get there. Okay, 5 ways to build a foundation for transformative self-service. So the first one is, let me get this going. Have a process to capture and reuse knowledge. So we adhere to the KCS principle. I don't know how many, if you're not familiar with it, it stands for knowledge-centered support. And if you want to have some homework, go Google KCS or the Consortium for Service Innovation. They're the ones who kind of, I guess, oversee this KCS methodology. And the principle of this is that you create knowledge and you create content as a byproduct of resolving issues. That's kind of boiling it down as, if I'm going off and I'm helping a customer with a case and I have to reach out maybe to a product manager or I have to reach out to a technical engineer. And in the process of solving that case, I'm creating new content. Why let that just stay, my little secret? Why don't I let everyone else know about it and publish that article or that knowledge so others can use it? And that's kind of the core of KCS, is that you create content as a byproduct of solving an issue. And you evolve that content as demand changes, as usage changes. So you keep an eye on what content is being consumed, what content is being used, and you don't create content for topics that aren't constantly being used. And you want it to be a rewarding, learning, collaborative experience, so people feel like they really have a vested interest because they're giving feedback, they're helping these KCS principles come to life. The second one is providing unified access to knowledge. So this is kind of a core concept that we adhere to, and I talked about it earlier with Adobe. Having a single unified index so that you can connect to all of that content wherever it resides, and making it searchable from one single location. And you can do that with, some people have custom built apps, some people have on-premise, some people have hosted cloud apps. So wherever that is, connect to it, index it, then apply that machine learning onto it. The third one is start to understand which metrics matter. And this kind of goes back to the KCS principle of tracking those metrics and understanding what content is being used, and don't focus your efforts on content that isn't being consumed. So traditional measures like average handle time, first contact resolution, cost per incident, those are traditional contact center metrics which still are valid and should continue to be looked at. But we recommend you look at other ones as well, the ones that are more focused on outcomes, like answers resolved. How many of the answers that you provided in your website actually resolve the issues? What is the self-service success rate? So self-service success is measured by people going to the website, having an issue, and finding what they need without creating a case. And then looking at known to new case ratio. So these are some kind of new terms that we're going to throw at you, and I don't want to go into every single one of them. We're going to talk about analytics a little bit later, but these are just some new ones to start thinking about, and you may have others. So if you have others that you think are good, put it in the chat box, and we're always interested to hear of new metrics that people are measuring, because no organization is the same. Everyone has very different metrics for how they measure self-service success. And I talked about machine learning a little bit earlier, and really, you know, it kind of is a overarching theme. AI is kind of artificial intelligence is kind of a bigger umbrella term to describe kind of machine learning. But, you know, we feel you should embrace the power of AI to drive this relevance and personalization, and really not, you know, be scared of it. And when we talk about machine learning, I mean, machine learning just for technology's sake really isn't helpful. We think that machine learning should drive a business benefit, and we think that business benefit is relevance. So if you're having content that you can index from all these different systems, and you're adding the context, so, you know, like I talked about Adobe, knowing where they've come from, what they're doing on your site, so adding that context, and then looking at the intent and analytics of what other people like them have done, then you can start to deliver relevance and say, I think this article, and actually I know this article should be ranked higher, and I know it should be shown to people who query for this, this, and this. And that can't be done by hand. I mean, when you're doing it thousands and thousands and thousands of times, you just can't manually do that. So you need to have machine learning in there to do it. And then the fifth one is learn from the behavior of your crowd to improve. And we'll show you kind of another level of metrics to look at when you start down this path of building a solid self-service strategy. So some things to look at are content gaps. So what are users going on and searching for and they're not able to find? That's going to lead to low CSAT, and that's going to drive up your customer effort score.
David, do you have a summary slide, or was it at the beginning of steps 1 to 5 that quickly? I know everyone will get a recording, they'll get the slides and stuff. So as we go through that, I think there was a slide that was sort of steps 1 to 5 right there, building the foundation. Great, by the way, and thank you for taking us through very logically each of those steps. And by the way, audience, I have posted a couple of questions to you on the chat bot function, so feel free to answer any of those questions. David, from the lessons learned, I mean, each of these are extremely critical in these 5 steps, but where are people, have you experienced, mainly getting hung up at? What step, or where's the greatest challenges are you finding and seeing across the spectrum? You know, I know all of them have to work, but is there one particular area that's kind of the center point?
I would say 2 things. One is a lot of times they know what they want to measure, but they don't feel like they have the tools or the capabilities to measure that, like self-service success. A lot of conferences and stuff we go to, we hear about self-service success, and they want to measure case deflection. And you know, case deflection can be measured so many different ways, and so many people have different. And we're not saying there's, you know, only one way to measure case deflection. I mean, we have our own point of view about case deflection and how to measure it. But I would say people maybe get hung up on the benchmarking and the analytics right out of the gate, and that sometimes maybe will trip them up, versus saying, let me take some baby steps and let me kind of index all of my different content sources first, and then I can start seeing how people are consuming content, and then I can start kind of deciding what benchmarking metrics I need to do. But I think sometimes we see people, they try to solve all the data analytics questions first
That's
without
a good point,
taking
and
the first step.
I appreciate it. Okay, audience, I'm going to ask a quick poll. So leave the slide up. As you look at 1 through 5, from your best guess, from experience or where you sit, which is the area that's most, I guess, challenged for you, or where maybe you're at in that, what I just asked David in regards to that maybe creating some difficulty, getting us tripped up a bit, or having some challenge with. So organically, if there is a step that's identified here, quick poll, is it 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? And you can just send that to me, and I'd love to get kind of where the audience sits. Got a few people coming in right now. David, we got 2, we got 1. Come on, guys, give me some more voting. Number 4, number 4, number 2, 3, 1. So I'll tally this up later, but I haven't seen any 5s. I'm seeing 2s and 4s, a couple of 1s. Any reaction to that, David, just from the quick audience poll?
No, I think that makes sense. I mean, 5 is more of one. I think 5 is more of a, like, after you've been doing it for a while, then you can kind of start to, learn the behavior and do more analysis. But I think 5 is more of a more mature, kind of on the spectrum type of step. So it doesn't surprise me, 1, 2, and 3 seem to be the top vote getters.
Well, Eileen, you just messed up all my voting. Eileen just voted for 2, so it looks like 2 is maybe the winner here. But we'll tally that up. We'll tally it up, and please, I'd love to hear from you. But David, I got us a little bit off course here, but I thought we didn't get lost in the steps because they're so critical to the foundation of what we were trying to communicate today. And these are great slides to have on reference as we go forward. So let's fast forward to where we left off, and thank you again, audience. And I see all your comments coming in, by the way, from my questions and stuff, and I will make sure that I can air them a little bit later.
Yeah, so and you can read through these, when you get the slides, but I want to call your attention to the benchmark data, and these are kind of what we defined as best in class. So I talked about, the average click rate of trying to have your content, and we'll measure this for every single customer, and they can measure it themselves, is where is the average click rank of that content that your customers are using to self-serve? And then what is that query click-through rate? Best in class, you want over 50. We typically see a lot of customers in the 60s. So they're doing really well. And that's just because the content the more relevant content you're displaying in those search results, you would assume that the click-through rate would be higher. And this is just, in practice, just to show, well, how does some of this show up? So, I talked about the content gaps when you search for something and nothing comes up. So, you want to just kind of these quick cards to show, what are people searching for that they're not finding? What top documents are leading to case creation? So this is interesting because it's either the documentation maybe is not clear, maybe it's outdated, maybe it needs to be reworked, so you can actually see which documents. So people are trying to self-serve and they're going in and reading content, but it's actually creating more issues and creating making a case be created. On the flip side, top 5 documents leading to case deflection. So you need to understand these and look at these and say, what are we doing in these documents that we should be doing in the other documents? Because these are the ones that are really deflecting cases and helping drive up that CSAT and lower my cost to serve. And here's just another look at how you can look at this information. I talked earlier about the click rank. This is kind of just a very global snapshot of everything that you're doing to see what's happening. So I won't dive into that too deeply because you'll get these. And then, we talked about self-service success and case deflection, and there are a lot of different ways when self-service is done correctly that these metrics show up. So it can be from a customer experience standpoint, it can be from a case deflection standpoint, as we said. It can drive up CSAT, If you look at the Salesforce example, talk about how it helps employees be more proficient and actually decrease the amount of time it takes to train them in the call center. And even partners, when partners use it, when they have content in their portal that they can use, they're more engaged with that company.
David, Darren, before we continue on, I'm in the maturing model, just real quick. Darren asked, could you explain more about the challenges around defining deflection?
Sure. So,
and thank you, Darren, for the question.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, at a high level, self-service success is I'm going to a website, I have an issue, I go to the website, I find what I'm looking for, I don't have to create a case, I don't have to interact with anyone, check. A subset of that is case deflection. Again, a lot of companies define it different ways. How we define case deflection and how we measure it and what we think is the best practice is I'm on the website, I'm going through the motions of trying to self-serve, I can't find the content that I'm looking for, so I click on, submit a case, create a case, log a support issue, whatever, and I'm going through that workflow of creating a case. Now, one of the best practices we do is we serve up, as you're going through that case creation process, we're dynamically, based on what you're putting into those forms, we're dynamically showing content, contextual content that we think can help solve that case. So in the course of doing that, if you find what you need in the course of creating that case and you click out of that, that is considered a case deflection because you've shown intent to create a case. We contextually showed you something that helped and you ended up not creating a case. That's how we would define case creation. I've heard some companies, some actually very large companies, define case creation as, case deflection as I'm on the website, I create a case, I go and I search around some more, I find what I need, I go back into that case and I delete it or I cancel it. And they measure that as a case deflection. Personally, I don't think that's the best practice because that's putting a lot of ownership on the actual user to go in and actually cancel the case and go through that whole process again. So there are a lot of different, everyone has a little bit different viewpoint, a little bit different way, but that's kind of how we view it. That helps.
Thank you. All right, let's continue. We got a few more here, and then we're going to get some more questions. And Darren got your note. Thank you again.
So this is the last slide I'll leave you with, and this is kind of a way, Chad talked about, the 1 through 5 and what kind of where do people get maybe tripped up or where do they struggle. This is probably one of the first things we show prospects or customers is we kind of ask them, where do you think you would fit today? If you had to rank yourself on a relevance maturity model, with ultimately the goal being, self-learning predictive recommendations, because that's where you're starting to drive more proficiency for your customers and for your agents and employees. And so we could spend a whole hour just digesting all of this, but you'll see the higher you get up on the chart, the more business impact and positive ROI you're going to have because you're moving from more of a reactive, low relevance type of strategy to a more proactive and predictive type of strategy. So with that,
go back to that last slide real quick. I was just going to say, for a very unscientific poll model, the winner in our polling was number 2, with a very, very right behind it, number 4. Content navigation came up as the number 1 area. Based on that, David, what suggestions, reaction, comments, ideas, if that got the most voting, number 2, again, number 4 is just 1 vote less, but what's your reaction and thoughts and comments there?
So 2 was the 2 and 4. So I want to make sure I understand. These are the 2 that people thought that they got tripped up with, or that they...
I'm sorry, the 5-step outline, this is a little bit different in the maturity model you have here, but in those 5 steps on that one particular slide, I know it's going back a couple there. If we could look at that, if number 2 came up as the most voted on, with 4 slightly behind it, my question was thoughts, comments, suggestions, ideas, where to start, how to start, best practices, anything you can kind of leave our audience with of some ideas.
Yeah. So I think 2 is a very natural, logical place to get started. Because then once you have that, I mean, that's really the linchpin of everything, is once you've connected all of those different sources, then you can start applying machine learning to them and start measuring. So, I mean, 2 is kind of that's the key to everything. So it's good to see people, say 2 is important. I think 4 gets brought up a lot because just machine learning, AI, it's kind of infused everything that we talk about and everything we read about, and that's why I put up that slide that kind of broke down what we mean by content plus context plus intent equals relevance or machine learning, because people, me included, we have this kind of big idea of what we think machine learning is, and it seems like some faceless big strategy that you don't know how to make it practical. And so I think by breaking it down and actually providing unified access to content is one of the first steps in achieving, that machine learning and that relevance. So I can see why 2 and 4 are kind of closely linked, because they kind of need each other.
Perfect, thank you. I'm going to let you go ahead and back and finish. We've got Q&A and some other things that I want to make sure we get in there, and appreciate everyone's participation.
Yeah, so just think of where you would map on this today, and where maybe what good would look like. And not everyone maybe wants to be a 6. Maybe you'd be happy with a 2 or 3. That would be progress, which is fine. So, Chad talked about, what are some best practices, how to get started. So we do have a free version of the product that you can, if you're a Salesforce user or a Microsoft Dynamics 365 user, there is a way to go on and download the Coveo app and get started for free, just to try out, look at the reports, to connect some data sources and do that. So that's kind of my last slide. And Chad, I appreciate you having me on and being able to walk through this, and be happy to take some questions.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, David. And I've got a couple of ending slides here. I want to make sure that I get the opportunity to share with folks, but I want to get into some of the Q&A. And Thomas, you may have to help me out a little bit on this, the way it's coming through. But Thomas is asking if on an article, if issue resolves similar to FCR, and then the follow-up question to that was, did they need to access more than one article? Does that help answer? Is that
repeat the first the first one about FCR?
Yeah, so again, Thomas was asking, the first question was an article if issue results similar to FCR, and then did they need to access more than one article? Maybe, Thomas, you can send me a little more detail to there so I can try to help out a little bit on that question, but making sure that I'm getting that correctly.
So I think what he's what he's getting at is viewing an article. Let's say you go on, you search, you view an article, and that resolves your case. Is that a similar metric to first contact resolution? I've never heard it put that way, but I think the core concept is the same. I mean, you're talking about you're talking about at the end of the day customer effort and the effort of the customer to get what they need without having multiple attempts. So I've never seen FCR kind of grouped in with, you know, reading a knowledge article, but I think the same concept applies.
Okay, perfect. And again, if there's further clarification on that, just drop me a note on it. I want to go back to the beginning when we opened up. I asked folks, you can stay on the slide here, but really about where they're at in their own self-service strategy after we defined what we were saying was self-service and where they were personally at, what was working, what challenges. And I thought it'd be beneficial just to read a couple of the comments here. Stephen, thank you. I know you had mentioned that you opened up a self-service strategy, you said, about 5 years ago, and the benefits have been OPEX reduction in lifts and CSAT, and the challenges are driving increased adoption of capability. David, any reaction again to where they've seen the successes and some of the challenges that he mentioned? And I can repeat that if you need me to.
Repeat the first part of it. I kind of got lost in the first part.
So the benefits are OPEX reduction and lifts and CSAT. The challenges are driving increased adoption of capability.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the whole OPEX discussion is interesting because a lot of customers, you know, have the viewpoint of, is it a CapEx, is it OPEX? I don't know if I have a strong reaction to either one of those, to be honest.
That's fine, and if anyone does or has thoughts on that, I'd love to hear more with it. Hey, Eileen, I saw that you mentioned you don't have a full service strategy with static website FAQs, but you've used IVRs, or you have it in the IVR piece, and you know, again, if they don't have a full service strategy around static website FAQs, again, David, just is there a place to start or anything there that would be a recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, IVRs definitely, you know, there's obviously a place for them, and depending on specific industries. But you know, we've been experimenting too with, you know, the digital assistants like, you know, Google Assistant and Alexa, and really it's just a touch point. You know, that the IVR is kind of the door, the gatekeeper into that knowledge. So, you know, whether you want to, you know, some people have, you know, voice IVRs where they speak responses. So, I mean, you could query off the voice if you needed to. I mean, even if you're using Slack, we've experimented with Slack, it's kind of using it as a bot. So, you know, I would say our core strength is around online web self-service, but I would view IVR as just kind of another one of those channels or touch points, and not really kind of the end destination. Okay.
And I also had some questions earlier about what has been either the challenges or what lessons have been learned that maybe people would be willing to share. And Mike, thank you. Mike said one metric they use is to look at how many interactions it took to resolve a customer's issue as a metric. Have you seen that before? Is that unique to Mike, or is that common?
No, I think it's the best practice. I mean, you definitely want to get down. I mean, you can even get down to the user path and say, you know, what did this person search for? What topics are they searching for to get these answers? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, you want that customer effort score to be low, and if your number of articles viewed is going up, then something's not right. And that's part of the beauty of having machine learning and relevance, is because you're elevating that helpful content higher and higher. And so it's learning as more people use it, that content becomes higher and higher and higher.
Perfect. Well, again, the good news is, David, with experts like yourself and many people in the community, we are not in this journey alone. We have a lot of unique ways that we can assist each other in kind of these lessons and kind of transformative changes that we're all looking at within our brands. And you do not need to be in isolation in this journey. There are many people willing to share insights and best practices around that. And part of the thing is, if you've not been to one of our national leadership forums, we host these twice a year. It really is a two and a half day powwow about everything around transformative change and customer engagement, best practices. We're going to be in Marina del Rey in the LA area. If you are a first-time guest and you'd like to come out to one of our national events, drop me a note. I'd be happy to tell you what's involved and how it works. But it's a great gathering of the mind, so to speak. If you want to go to, if there's a next slide here, David, that we may have here. Also, we do a series of interactive briefings. We're going to be in Chicago in August, and then in Seattle for a one-day briefing about the whole machine learning, AI, transformative changes. A lot of information there. I highly encourage you to attend. They're like a 9 to 4 deep dive about, again, many insights and best practices. We're going to be in Chicago August 16th. I hope you can come join us for that. David, is there another slide here? And then I want to ask you a final thought question here. So, David, there was a few, funny how fast time goes, and I didn't get to all of the questions, but what would be, recommendations, ideas, where to start, or what would you really like to leave the audience with from today's session and learning, and, any, again, recommendations on where to start, with some of the conversation we had?
And one thing that I would suggest is, the digital support kind of function. It's interesting because it sits obviously on the web property in the community as well. So I would just recommend sitting down with, if you're in the customer support role or function, go and schedule a meeting or grab coffee with someone who is maybe in the marketing side, the digital marketing side, and ask them, look at what metrics they're looking at and seeing, click paths and where people are going, and just get a view for, so maybe some insights that marketing is looking at, because I think a lot of times we tend to kind of silo ourselves off and think of, well, the support page is just, just for me. And on the flip side, I would have some metrics to show the digital marketing customer experience people, like, this is what we're seeing. This is what people are doing on our side when they have support issues, because I think each group can learn from it. And, the more transformational your online self-service strategy is, the more those different teams are going to have to work together, because it should be pretty invasive, for lack of a better word, on your website. So definitely involving marketing is going to be a key. So that would be my kind of takeaway.
Great comment on there, and I'm glad we had that comment from you on there. David, if people want to reach you, is there a best way they can reach you? Is there, just for the point of the recording, is there a phone number or email that we can include? Sure.
You can email me directly at djames, so D as in David, James, James, at Coveo, Coveo.com. I'd be happy to talk with you.
Well, I want to say thank you again. We're at the 1 hour mark, and I want to thank all of our audience for listening to today's session. I will look for your feedback. You'll be getting a reminder to complete a quick quick questionnaire. If you could help me out on that, I would appreciate it. Everyone have a great rest of your week. David, I can't thank you enough for your time and an ability to join us today, and giving some great data models to work from and look at, and I can't wait to get the copy of the slides tomorrow.
All right, thanks for having me.
Okay, everyone have a great day on this. This now concludes today's webinar, and have a great day. Thank you.